Hello and welcome to the Big Yearning Podcast, released alternate Mondays at 5 p.m. UK time. We are two life coaches who really enjoy meaningful conversations about big questions. Our work and our lives have been shaped by these questions, and they've taken us to some amazing places in our lives and in ourselves. We all long for things. We all carry big yearnings in our hearts. And over the next hour or so, we hope to touch on some of these feelings and perhaps give you ideas or insights to help you get clearer about what you long for and how to get it. Hello everybody and welcome to episode 14 of the Big Yearning Podcast. My name's Alexander.
And my name's Neil.
And today we're going to be talking about the topic of learning to love yourself. Before we dive into that, and before we even do our check-ins, I'm just going to talk about how we pick our topics and how these relate to our sort of core subject of big yearnings. So whatever your big yearnings are, those things that call you through life, that go perhaps unanswered for a long period of time, the things that you really yearn for, the things that you long for, there are always supplementary skills that we need in order to get there. There are topics that we need to consider. There are things we need to develop. There are skills that we need to master. So that's what we're doing. Over time, we're checking in with those different topics, those different skills, those different subjects, and we're trying to give you more ideas and more inspiration so that you can be moving towards your big yearnings. So today, our topic of self-love and learning to love yourself, we'll be talking about why that's important and how it relates to this idea of moving towards the things we most yearn for in our lives. Okay, so welcome to today's episode, and just an invitation to please do spread the word about this podcast. If you find things that we say helpful, if we jog some thoughts for you, if there are people you think of while you're listening, you think, hey, that person could really do with listening to this topic, then please do send them a link, do tell them the name. You can find this podcast on all the major platforms, and to anyone who's listening on Apple through Apple Podcasts, apparently it's really helpful if you leave reviews. It helps more people connect with the work that we're doing here, so please do that if you're an Apple person. So, before we jump into our topic, let's do our check-ins. Neil, how are you doing, mate?
Thanks, Alexander. Generally speaking, I feel pretty good. I just wanted to start off with something that I came across just about an hour ago, actually, that really moved me. I was watching the BBC News item about COVID-related food poverty in Burnley. Only a short piece of 4 or 5 minutes. And it's about these two vicars who are trying to help their local community. And it really brought tears to my eyes, actually. My first response was, my overarching response was one of kind of sadness that how is it that in this day and age, in such a wealthy society that we live in, that people are not getting enough to eat? Now, that question is well beyond the scope of this check-in and this podcast, but I was really moved by that, and that's what's alive in me right now. I suppose I generally think, how can a piece of information like that, or being exposed to something like that, how can that motivate me or move me towards some kind of assistance or some kind of contribution that has some meaning? So I'm with that for the moment. Personally, big news in my life is that, touch wood, that's the sound of me tapping wood, touching wood, my toothache, which I've had for the last 8 or 9 days, is gone. Yes, I've been really struggling with that, and it's really interesting to kind of just be with bodily pain and discomfort, and I've had to work quite hard to not let my old historical stories about dentists and toothache kind of swamp me. And I've actually been quite grown up about it and quite adult, and managed not to dip too much around that. So thankfully toothache is over. And the last thing I want to say is that this particular topic, learning to love yourself, and applying that to myself, learning to love myself, in doing the sort of thinking and reflecting about this, has been really challenging for me, really hard and a bit triggering at times. And so I'm really pleased to be doing it for myself as well as the listeners. I think I learn and grow through kind of broaching these things. But I think, this is number 14, isn't it? And I think of all the ones that we've done, I think this feels to me, in terms of the preparation, the one that has really asked the most of me in terms of how do I really relate to this? What does it say to me? What do I need to do? How do I need to be in relation to this question and this enterprise, if you like, this thing of loving myself? So, yes, I'm looking forward to our discussion, and I really hope that the listeners benefit from it. Yeah, so that's me.
Lovely. Thank you, Neil. As for my check-in, I've been fine. I have found the second lockdown in the UK to be harder than the first one. The first one, I sort of entered it with a lot of energy and verve, and I was doing sort of daily workouts with my home kit, and I was going for runs, and I was structuring my time. And I've got to find that for whatever reason, the second one was a lot harder to do that. So I'm really looking forward. We're recording this right at the end of the second lockdown, and really looking forward to the gyms reopening and cafes reopening. I do really enjoy sitting in a cafe with my double espresso and scribbling notes down, or reading, or tapping away on a keyboard. It's really a lovely environment for me, and it makes me feel very creative to sort of get out of my usual space and go and sit in a shared space. I think it has some sort of shared communal sort of feel at the same time as I'm being injected with a large amount of caffeine. So I did a lot of my writing of my book in cafes. I'm just really looking forward to that experience. There's a couple of particularly nice cafes in Kemp Town in Brighton where I live. Really just looking forward to sitting in them, and looking forward to the gym reopening. I'm looking forward to working really hard and getting back into my body. That's really good for me, so I'm very much looking forward to that. I've been spending a lot of time sort of looking to the future, dreaming and planning and visioning. I've created a big version of my 5-year plan on a board, which I'll be putting on the wall to sort of keep me present with it and keep it alive for me every day. And the first marketing drive for my book, Deep Joy, begins at the first half of December. So hopefully you will start seeing the name popping up all over the place in January. Hopefully that should appear in some major print media and in some and on some shows and various other places. So keep an eye out for that. Hopefully my book will start hitting the big scene next year. We've got a big plan. My PR guy and I have a big plan for the first half of next year, and how we're going to make my book into more of a known thing, into a bit of a sensation. So really looking forward to that beginning. I mean, some trepidation as well, but really excited that this thing that I put so much passion and care and hard work into is going to hopefully appear on the big scene in a big way. So that's me, really. That's my check-in.
Every time you talk about your book, I'm just kind of really wowed. I think anybody who can write a book, it's such a massive achievement. So I just want to, really, really acknowledge that. I mean, I can see your face now. I can see how lit up you are with that. So I really wish you well with that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Not meaning to embarrass you, okay?
No, it's a really interesting journey, becoming a inverted commas author, becoming someone who has produced this thing and it's now out in the world. I'm very slowly learning to get used to talking as someone who has produced a book and who receives feedback about a book. When my clients or my friends who are reading the book, they reach a section and it blows their mind and they call me and they tell me about it. It's quite awkward still. And Neil, thank you. Recently, you gave me a fulsome bit of very warm feedback about the book, which you're currently reading, I think.
Yes.
And it was awkward as hell for me, but it also felt amazing. So that is just a part of my learning curve right now. Okay, let's dive into our main topic for today. So today we're going to be talking about learning to love yourself. In relation to the idea of big yearnings, this is hugely important, and we will be talking today about why it's so important, why self-love is such an intrinsic need, why love is such an intrinsic need for human beings, all the things that we get out of doing this work, all of the challenges and the hardship that can come up when we consider this subject. This is a hard topic. But if we want to get to a place in our life where our big yearnings, our deepest longings are met, we're going to need to embrace love as a concept. And we're going to need to become versed in loving ourselves and providing ourselves with that need, with being able to wholly and fully and with a lot of intention and energy providing ourselves with the love that we need. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And we hope that while you listen, you'll understand why this becomes so crucial when we're talking about stepping beyond our current boundaries and our limits and really setting a course towards our biggest yearnings in our lives. So, as ever, we've approached this with 3 topics each. So I have 3 and Neil has 3. Neil, I'm going to invite you to speak first on your first topic.
Thanks, Alexander. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is what I've entitled the social aspect of self-love. And this is by way of setting the scene, really, setting the kind of parameters for the discussion and really looking at what it is to be a human being and the role of self-love and I suppose its naturalness. So when we're born as babies, we're hardwired to expect love to come towards us from the community of people around us, from those close to us, as well as those not so close. That's kind of within our genetic makeup. It's part of our evolutionary makeup. And that love coming towards us is supposed to continue through our childhood and adolescence, so that when we reach adulthood, we've internalized the love that has come towards us. And through this internalized love, we are able to love ourselves. That's basically what we've evolved to experience. That's the template that should meet us throughout our lives. And as I was doing this, Alexander, speaking about your book, I think this material is very, very similar to, I think, the first page of your book, in terms of looking at, as human infants, as human beings coming into the world, what are we hardwired to expect? Now, this isn't the experience of so many of us, maybe the majority of us. I don't want to make generalizations here, but it's my experience that so many of the people I meet, this has not been their experience of this unsolicited love kind of coming towards them. Now, I believe that's a function of the culture that we live in. The reasons for that are not the topic of this podcast, maybe for another podcast, but that's not to kind of delve into right now. But suffice to say, my belief is that we don't really live in a culture that supports us in developing self-love within ourselves. And when I referenced in my check-in this being really challenging topic to address, part of that was when I thought about the question, how can we love ourselves? Quite a lot of sadness came up in me, because to me it implies that in our culture we've been left to do the bulk of the work of creating love inside us ourselves. We've been left to do that ourselves as somewhat isolated individuals, as opposed to loving oneself being something that naturally occurs as part and parcel of the social groups and the communities that we live in. Now, I'm saying this because I'm echoing what you said, really, Alexander, just now, that this can be a really hard thing to do. So this is not easy stuff to love oneself. So I just wanted to kind of set the parameters there in terms of what's the baseline that we're coming from? It's kind of like we're coming from a less than position in terms of human evolution and what we naturally kind of expect to receive and gain in terms of self-love. And I think that even though the question for me hit into some sadness, that actually kind of makes me think, well, it's even more of a critical and vital question to respond to have a response to grapple with, to share with your friends and family, to dig down in yourself in terms of what does this mean to me? What can I do? What small or big acts in the world can I do to engender a greater sense of self-love, of feeling that I'm a good person, feeling that I'm here and things are more than okay and I have a right to be here. So that sets the scene, hopefully. Over to you, Alexander.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Neil. That's got us started. I'm going to talk about the topic of what is self-love for and what's the point of it as my first kind of topic. I'm going to start with this because every time the idea of self-love comes up with one of my coaching clients, there is often a sense of reluctance or a sense of confusion. Why would we prioritize this idea? Some clients have told me that this is a self-indulgent or selfish or that it's a waste of time. But a lot of others have told me that they know it's important. They've been told it's important. They've read the books. They've seen the shows. They know that the idea of loving yourself is important, but how the hell do you do it? Where do you get started? So I want to begin by saying why would we do this? Why would we try and commit energy and time to trying to do this work of loving ourselves, but also to unpicking all the barriers and resistance and reluctance that exists within us that stops us being able to just effortlessly do this? And I want to begin by saying that I don't really think of love itself as an emotion. I think of it as our natural state of being. While we often think about romantic love, love itself is just about being open. It's about showing care. It's about being attentive and present and connected. We need love to function properly as human beings. We are at our best when we live a loving life. That's giving and receiving love. Now, when we're loving other people, we need really clear boundaries around that, because when we are loving, we're open, we are connected, we are vulnerable with somebody. So if we choose to love somebody, whether that's romantically or as a really close friend or a member of our family, then there is a certain amount of boundary work that needs to exist there. Every person brings their own stuff to the table, and we need to be sure that we're going to be safe with that person. So we have different levels of boundaries, different criteria for connection with other human beings. But when it comes to ourselves, it's not quite the same. Love itself is an intrinsic and inherent human need. That's what Neil's just been talking about. We start off as infants needing it in order to survive. You know, there's quite a lot of evidence that babies do not do well if they are not actively shown love. But as we grow up, that doesn't go away. Love remains one of our intrinsic needs. We simply need it in order to function and in order to thrive, in order to fully embrace and connect with our life, with each moment. It brings us to life. It feeds our minds and our hearts to exist within a loving state. It's really easy, I think, to neglect ourselves, to ignore our relationship with ourselves, to focus either entirely externally, focus on people around us, focus on our obligations in life, focus on turning up to work and doing our jobs properly, and then being the person that our partner needs us to be, or being the person that we're expected to be in our family, or in all sorts of different situations. We know that these people around us need things from us, and so we can focus on just them and their needs. It's also really easy to focus just on our failings, or the ways that we've screwed up, or all the ways that we're insufficient, or all the things we're disappointed about in ourselves. It's very easy to focus on those. Those aren't exclusive to the idea of self-love. As I'm going to come on to talk about later, self-love can run in parallel with all sorts of other things. And while we're doing all of this difficult work with learning to kind of just accept ourselves and just be okay with ourselves, you can also be practicing self-love. If we can mix self-love into the mix, then it gives us the energy and the vitality to do better. So why do we do this? Why do we focus on self-love as a project, as something we know we need to do in life? Well, I would say it changes everything. It brings a sense of lightness and wonder and imagination into our lives. It rebalances situations that feel heavy or feel stuck or feel impossible. It's a way to push back against stress and worry. When it comes to looking after other people, we can't pour from an empty cup. It's a way of revitalizing ourselves and making sure that we have what we need. It's not a hokey and silly idea, and it doesn't mean being selfish. It means being responsible. To me, in my mind, it means being alive. If you want to really be here and be present to the moments that are happening around you, be present to your relationships, be present to the experiences that you're having, then love is something that grounds you, that brings you into the moment. So I would invite you for the rest of this podcast, and once the podcast is over and going on, to try to treat yourself as you would a best friend, or better than that, how you would a young child that you love very much. We talk a lot, Neil and I, about adulthood and becoming a fully embodied adult. But that doesn't mean that there aren't parts of us which are frightened and vulnerable children. I think we've spoken before about the idea of an inner child, and at some point we can go into the psychology of that, where it comes from, why it exists. But it does. There is a part of us which is very vulnerable and which needs care and which needs love. So refer to yourself, treat yourself as you would a young child that you love and you care about very deeply. I think this fits very well with this idea of embodied adulthood, because by parenting that child and by caring for that child, it inspires us and it encourages us to occupy more of this empowered adult persona. Overall, I just invite everybody to trust that when you're loved, you will be your best self. This isn't about self-indulgence, selfishness. It's not a waste of time. It really is work, hard work, in order to step into ourselves fully and in order to maximize our experience of life. So that's why we do it, and why I think this is really important for everybody. And if you are squirming with the idea of self-love, and if you're listening to this thinking, I don't want to do this is a waste of time, I'm very uncomfortable, then I would actually invite you to reflect on the idea that you need to do this work more than anybody. And it's okay to do this work, and it's okay to listen to the rest of this podcast, and it's okay to begin considering the idea that loving yourself is a gift to yourself and a gift to other people around you. So that was the first thing I wanted to say. That's my first point.
And it's okay to have a squirmy reaction, I would say.
And it's okay to have a squirmy reaction. Absolutely.
Thanks, Alexander. So you mentioned inner child, and you said that notion is not a hokey one. It is something that is kind of psychologically real, I suppose, would be a good phrase to use. So the bit I'm going to speak about, I've entitled Building a Relationship with Your Inner Child, or the part of you that needs loving or that didn't get the love that you needed some time back. So again, you talk about this in your book, Deep Joy. So again, I would point listeners towards Alexander's book. There's also another book that you mention in your book by a guy called John Pollard, which is called Self-Parenting, if people want to follow this stuff up. For me, it's really important that with these podcasts, we we signpost listeners if there's stuff that kind of clicks off for you that we talk about. It's really good to kind of have other material to kind of follow through on. So there's a couple of references there. Okay, so like I said, what I'm going to talk about now follows on very neatly from my first point and from what you've just said, Alexander. So if we haven't received the love that we would optimally have liked to have received when we were a child, it's very likely that this child part that didn't get the love that it needed continues to live on inside of us. Hence the notion of an inner child. And that's my kind of working understanding. It continues to live on. So there's part of you that still has needs for love, didn't get what it needed. It's not only living on inside of you, but actually it's kind of, I find for me, I'll speak for myself, it kind of drives me, sometimes in an unconscious way, maybe sometimes to look for love in places where it's not going to find love. Now, I'm going to talk about something kind of practical that I do, not just myself, but a lot of people, people I know do this, and it's a kind of common practice. And that is to kind of set up a dialogue with your own internal inner child. I've been aware of this as an idea, as a practice even, for quite a while, really, probably more than 10 years. But it's only within the last sort of 6 to 8 months that I've really taken this on board and started to work with this. So I'm going to talk about my experience of this as a kind of template, which hopefully the listeners can kind of get something from. So the first thing that I did, and just to really explain this, that I didn't come up with this by myself. I was facilitated through this and helped with this and supported with this through close friends in a kind of therapeutic kind of way. So the first thing I did was I invoked an image of myself as a child. And what was important about that is that choosing an image that intuitively feels right. So all of the detail around this is really important. You might choose an image of yourself when you were 2 or 3 or 6 or 7. It might be an image of you in the home where you grew up. It might be an image of you in the playground. It might be an image of you at the seaside. The basic premise here is to trust your feelings, trust your psyche really, to come up with an image of the younger you that fits in terms of the younger you that you would like to give love to that never got the love that it needed. So that's the first part. And then the second part, what I did was to bring in another figure, an adult figure, a parental or caregiving figure that can give love to the little one, to the little boy or the little girl inside of you. And again, with that image, make it could be someone real from your life. It could be someone kind of fictional. It could be someone kind of completely made up. I mean, my image is a fictional one, really. But again, I've taken time to sort of really imagine, what does this parental figure look like? It's actually a parental figure with really strong arms, really strong forearms that protect me, that envelop me. So I spent, and those images, both the image of me and the protective adult have kind of evolved over the last sort of couple of months to become more refined and more honed. And that's really important in terms of being really, really as comfortable as I can possibly be with setting up this internal dialogue. Now, so I've got as far as I've delineated these two parts of me, okay, a child part and an adult caregiver, loving, protective part. And for me, the really interesting thing about that is that I am putting into place a part of me that can love another part of me. So what that means, logically thinking, is that there is a part of me that can love myself and that I am not completely unlovable. So this goes back to my first point about the social aspect of self-love. In as much as I've created a dynamic relationship within myself where I can give to that part of me, that little boy part that needs that love that it didn't get, I can give it that love from a more adult place. And one of the things that serves to do is that firstly, it brings everything up into consciousness. It acknowledges the need, and it doesn't let my inner child rule the roost. Because sometimes that inner child can just flood me. And like I said earlier, I can go looking for love, getting needs met in places where they won't get met. So it brings it up all up into consciousness. And also, really importantly, kind of neurologically, and there's quite a lot of neuroscientific sort of research around this kind of thing. Over time, what you actually do is you kind of rewire neurological pathways. You create new pathways. You're going back to a previous childhood situation, a previous life situation where it's defined by lack or deficit or neglect or not getting stuff that you needed. And you're kind of rewiring that, you're rewriting that. You're saying, no, actually, okay, little one, now I can give you the love that you need here and now. I know that you live on in me. And it's about having that kind of finding things to say, finding a kind of a dialogue. And another thing that I found really interesting with this stuff, and this comes through talking with people about it and their experience of doing this kind of thing. In the early days of doing this, I had a habit of kind of like patronizing my inner child, kind of like patting it on the head and saying, there, you'll be all right, don't worry. But I realized that what I was doing quite subtly a lot of the time was really not paying attention to him, was really sort of trying to kind of actually get rid of the difficult feelings of loss or neglect or feeling unhappy, basically. So then what I started to do was make it my intention just to listen to the child inside of me. And so at the moment, when I kind of meet with the child inside of me, my little boy, often we don't say much. It's more about getting a kind of felt sense of this protective figure and that part of me that needed looking after, being looked after. And again, I want to come back to something you said, Alexander. This is not hokey stuff, you know. It may sound a bit kind of, you know, or feel a bit sort of skittish or a bit, I don't know, a bit strange, even a bit weird, kind of, you know, contemplating doing something like this. I think it's really important to acknowledge that, you know, the squirmy nature of it. You can look into yourself and see what that kind of skittishness or squirminess is about. And it's usually a good sign if there's a bit of that kind of stuff around in terms of resistance. It's usually a good sign that there's something to explore. There's something to get curious about at the very least. So I want to be really clear here. I'm not being sort of didactic and saying to listeners, you must go away and do this. What I'm saying is that if you feel like there's a bit of squirmishness around it, then as one of the things in your book, Alexander, you know, you're big on curiosity, aren't you? About exploring. It's like, be curious. Okay, something's kind of pricked me. Something's kind of poked me. What is that? And get interested in that. You know, without any kind of didactic kind of like saying you must do this to kind of heal your inner child. It's an offering. That's my second point, building this relationship with your inner child.
Really nice, Neil. Thank you. I'm a big believer in that self-parenting work. It is a distinct piece of work, and it's a sort of skill and an approach that we can learn. John Pollard's book is really good. I'm always, when I think about self-parenting, I'm always mindful of a really inspiring couple I know. They're a married couple, and they're just trying to be real about their marriage, and they're trying to be real with each other. They're trying to make this marriage work, and they're acknowledging how hard relationships are. And one of their ways of doing it, one of their offerings to it, is that every morning, once they've got up and they've had their breakfast, they take themselves off individually, they go to their own spaces, and they do an intentional piece of self-parenting work. And it just means that when they come back together, they're fully present in their adult parent self, and they're not triggering their children with each other. They're not inhabiting slightly murky, slightly shadowy places with each other. It's all very conscious and very intentional. And when she told me about this, when the woman in this marriage told me about this, I was just so overcome with respect by having that kind of commitment to the relationship that you would do the work for yourself. So yeah, I think self-parenting is wonderful. Okay, I'm going to come on to my second point now. So I'm just trying to get really practical about this idea of self-love. We've covered a lot about why we do this, and Neil's talked about self-parenting as a technique we can use for it. So I just wanted to talk more generally about what does self-love feel like, and what does it look like in someone's life when they are channeling self-love towards themselves. Often we don't really know where to start with this topic. We don't even know what it would look like or what it would feel like, or how the hell do I really consider that? As I said before, I think there are a lot of places and a lot of channels where we're told to care for yourself, self-care, self-love. But where do you begin? So I would say begin by thinking about love as a feeling. So if I'm right and that love is more than an emotion, it's just us in our natural state and in our best state, then if we think about what it feels like when we tell someone who we really love deeply that we love them, just what does that feeling feel like in the tummy? What does it feel like in the heart? Also, when somebody who we really care about, who's really precious to us, says to us, I love you, what does that feel like? It's kind of the same thing, ultimately. You're entering this state of love. So begin with just kind of experiencing that feeling, reconnecting with that feeling. And then here's a bit of an exercise to try. When you're alone, sit comfortably without any distractions and close your eyes and take a few centering breaths. And then bring your attention to your center, to your core, which I think of as the region in your body, which is kind of between your heart and down to your belly. That central squishy bit of your body, where all your organs are. Be with this bit of your body for a while. And each time you take a breath out, think of the words, I love you, and direct these words to your core. So breathe in, and then as you breathe out, think of the words, I love you, and direct them towards this tender, squishy part of your body. For me, this feels warm and tingly. It feels kind of like sunlight on the skin, or it feels like springtime. That's the experience that I have when I, for a while, choose to direct love towards this core part of me. If you do the self-parenting stuff, then I'd invite you to meet your inner child in your imagination, but also keep this bodily feeling of your core. For me, my inner child lives in my core. He lives in my tummy. I find them and I ask them how they're doing. Now, in my experience of self-parenting, I am the parent. I didn't, as Neil did, I didn't create a persona for my parent. I just was them. I was looking through their eyes, and I found me as a little boy. And what I do is I wrap my arms around little me, and I give them a big hug, and I tell them that I love them. And at the same time, what I find is I feel big arms wrapping around me, and I feel loved. And I have this sensation of warmth and tingliness in my tummy. That's what I have experienced it feeling like. And I just invite you to experience it for yourself. Just do the exercise of directing the words I love you to your tummy, to your heart, to your core, and see what comes up for you. There may be resistance. We are talking here that there are levels of resistance often within us that prevent us from freely and effortlessly loving ourselves. But if you continue doing it and you're just okay with that resistance and that squirminess and that discomfort, just continue directing the words I love you to your core. Just see how it is. How does it feel? For me, that's kind of the core, the practice of loving myself. Then what does it look like? What effects does this have in someone's lives? Well, I suppose I'd invite you to think about, how do you treat the people that you love the most? How would you respond if someone that you really love and that you really care about spoke badly about themselves? And how would you respond if you saw them treating themselves badly or letting other people treat them badly? How would you respond to that? I think that most of us would step in and would try to reassure and try to show care, and we would find it unacceptable that someone would say hurtful things about themselves or that would allow others to walk all over them, to disrespect their boundaries. So in my experience, self-love looks like positive self-regard. Not because we should treat ourselves in certain ways. It's not an obligation to have strong boundaries, and we talked about boundaries in another episode. It's not because we should talk to ourselves in certain ways, but because we care about ourselves. We wouldn't let someone talk to our best friend in that way. So why is it okay to speak to ourselves in that way? We wouldn't let a young child that we love to bits be shouted at or talked down to or treated badly by others. We would step in and protect them. And if we are actively directing love towards ourselves as a regular practice, and we become more and more comfortable with us, we won't be okay letting people disrespect us or overcome our boundaries or treat us badly. So I think that, what does it look like when someone is actively loving themselves, when someone has a practice of self-love? Well, it looks like self-respect. It looks like dignity. It looks like really prioritizing yourself and making sure that you are well cared for because you care for yourself that much. That's, in my experience, what it looks like when someone loves themselves. So that's my second point.
Thank you, Alexander. I was struck there by the kind of simple importance of recognizing what it feels like, those sensations in the body, and those trusting that and getting used to those kind of good feelings. I think that, when people say, oh, I feel good, it's really interesting to kind of drill down on that and what is the actual experience of feeling good. And invariably it is some kind of bodily sensation, some lightness, some tingliness, or some clearness in the body or something. So I say that I'm a bit biased here because I think I'm quite feelings led. So anything that kind of speaks to that, I kind of latch onto, really. So thank you. That was really, really good. I was thinking about, there's this quote by the Buddha, and he said something like, it's quite a famous one if you're interested in kind of Buddhist philosophy. He said something like, I have scoured the whole of the universe and not found anybody more deserving of loving kindness than myself. Which for me was really, really lovely, because I can sometimes have a sense of organized spiritual sort of philosophies being sort of self-sacrificing, almost kind of, kind of altruistic to a degree, where there's a self-denial. So I was really when I used to practice formally, Buddhist meditation and be in that world. I used to kind of reflect on that a lot, and obviously I still reflect it because it's kind of stayed with me, So it goes back to your point about it's not selfish, It's not selfish, You have every right to this. Yeah. Thank you. Okay. My final point is going to be a relatively brief one, and I've entitled it, "Be aware of what you're saying to yourself when you're performing an act of self-love." And I want to speak to this because I think this whole area can be a little bit slippery, and I can best articulate this by speaking about some everyday examples of kind of what I do, and hopefully then generalize it out. So I, like many other people, I guess, I can have thoughts about, like, okay, what sort of wholesome and good and fulfilling things and nurturing things can I do for myself today to make myself feel better, to give myself a sense of loving myself? And sometimes what I discover is that there's a subtle should, or a sense of a kind of worthiness about doing certain things. So it could be something like, a classic one for me would be doing some yoga. Now, I would love to have, in many ways, a regular yoga practice, but I don't. I just can't find the kind of commitment within me to do it. So it's very easy for me to get into a sort of situation whereby there's part of me which is saying, Neil, to make yourself feel better, you really should do some yoga. And now this is a fine balance between, because some of these practices require discipline, while at the same time, for me, it's really important to kind of listen to what voices are going on in my head. And quite often there's a sort of, you should be doing this. This is the kind of thing that a self-loving person does. And what's quite useful at that time is to ask yourself another question. And that question is there anything you would like even more than doing yoga or whatever it is? And so that kind of has the capacity to dig down a little bit deeper. And, sometimes I might answer that question by saying, yeah, I'd rather sit down and have a cup of tea in a chocolate hobnob. And, you may sort of chuckle a bit at that, and you may think, well, hang on, what's that got to do with self-love? But actually, it may be those kind of simple things, like just sitting down with yourself, not pushing on through because you think you should do something. But, I'm really kind of like inviting people here to really listen in and not get caught in this trap of a kind of compelled imperative should. Now, and I suppose also one of the things that I'm saying within this is that you can take exactly the same activity, whether it's yoga or meditation or going for a walk or seeing a friend or eating a healthy breakfast, and depending on the mindset with which you approach those things, they could either be self-loving or they could be self-punishing. That's one of the things I'm wanting to kind of say. So it's not like, I don't believe as a kind of podcast presenter here that I'm presenting a kind of template of how to do things. I'm kind of sort of speaking more to how I might not get tripped up and how the listener might not get tripped up. Don't get tripped up. Listen to yourself in terms of what you're doing being a true and authentic act of self-love. And remember this question, is there anything I would like even more than doing ... whatever you're doing? That's my final point.
Lovely. Thank you, Neil. I think the question of discipline and self-love is probably pretty complex one. And I think it's one that requires quite a lot of self-awareness in order to navigate. And perhaps it's something that we'll need to come back and talk about another time.
Sure.
And I'll be curious about your journey with your yoga practice.
Thank you. Are you equally curious about my journey with tea and hot chocolate hobnobs as well?
Perhaps more so.
Great. I'll keep you posted then.
I hope we'll have updates. Okay, I'm going to come on to my final point. My final point is entitled, You Do Not Need to Earn Self-Love. So I think many of us carry the idea, either consciously or unconsciously, that we don't really deserve love. There's something wrong with us, or we've just fallen short of some sort of threshold or criteria to deserve love. I think for almost everyone, we don't really define what that means. There is an unspecified line somewhere, and once we cross that line, we're a deserving person. We've done okay. It's okay for people to love us, and it's okay for us to love ourselves. But if we're falling short of that line, then we're not okay. We're not a good person. We don't deserve to be loved. If you ask yourself, under what circumstances would I earn love? When would I become deserving of love? I think either the question really doesn't make any sense, or we create criteria we can never reach intentionally. And this is the sort of thing that requires quite a lot of patient and careful consideration. There are a lot of unspoken criteria in our lives. They're either things that we've inherited from others, or they're things that we've built up over time, and they're almost always ridiculous. They're almost always unachievable, or unmeasurable, or in some way obscure, so that we can't really pay that much attention to them and we can't ever really succeed. A lot of people, in my experience as a coach, are held back by these unspecified beliefs around, when I have done this, then I will be deserving, then I will have succeeded, then it will be okay. And by not defining them too closely, we're safe from ever having to challenge them, ever having to go beyond them. But if we can get more specific about them, then things get really interesting. It's an example of how our minds try and fill the gaps in our feelings. If we feel that we don't deserve love, and if we feel disconnected from ourselves, then we tend to do this in our minds. We tend to create fantastical or vague criteria that we need to kind of live up to and meet in order to be okay as a person, in order to deserve love. It's just a feeling. The emotion is that there's something wrong, that we don't deserve love. That's what our feelings are telling us. But then our mind tries to make sense of it, and it creates a fantasy where there are criteria to fulfill. As I say, sometimes we're taught about this as children. We might interpret as infants who don't really understand what's going on. We don't understand the way that adults work. We don't understand the way that relationships work. We might interpret the way that our parent or our parents respond to us as their love being conditional. I will love you if you do well at school. I will love you if you behave well. Maybe they didn't mean that. Maybe they really didn't think like that. But as an infant, all you know is your own experience. So all you know is, I seem to get attention and affection and love if I live up to these criteria. And as children, we end up striving to fulfill those criteria, and then we internalize that, and we set it as this unconscious belief structure that we carry into adulthood, that we have to continue living up to these standards in order to be a good person. Because we learnt when we were children that that's when mummy or daddy shows love, and therefore that's what makes us a good person. That is our absolute number one criteria for being okay, for being good. There are no criteria for love. I just want to challenge this whole idea. You don't need to earn love. Love is our natural state. It is human beings at their best and at their most natural. So, love is not a reward. You deserve love right now, just as you are. You can do challenging personal work and continue to love yourself. You can recognize failings or mistakes in yourself and love yourself. You can be massively frustrated that you've made the choices you have and love yourself. You can be disappointed in your life and love yourself. You can have strong intentions to do better and love yourself. You are stuck with the person you are. You're not going to be able to escape being you. You also can't avoid the intrinsic need for love. So why not make this experience of being you into the best it can be by giving yourself the resources to be the best version of you? That is what self-love is for, and make it unconditional. It doesn't have to get in the way of other things. And if you have criteria in the back of your mind that I need to do X or Y in order to earn love, to be a good person before I'll bother doing this work to love myself, then I really encourage you to challenge those things. I'm sure there are things that you need to work on. There are things that you suck at. There are things that you need to do better at. There are mistakes that you keep making. We are all like that. We all have those. I have plenty of those. I'm sure Neil has plenty of those. You don't need to make these things exclusive. It's not either I'm perfect, I'm a good person, I've done everything well, tick, 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 therefore love. Self-love is something we can just do. It's something we can begin doing right now, and it's a thing we can continue to do even when we struggle with ourselves, even when we're in conflict with others, even when we're in difficult situations, even when we're really upset and low. We can do that in parallel with loving ourselves. So this is just a really strong invitation to decouple love from earning something, from fulfilling criteria. You don't need to earn self-love. You don't need to earn love. You are okay, and you can love yourself now. And that was the final point I wanted to make.
Thank you very much, Alexander. Lovely, thank you. Really clear exposition of a very well-made point. Thank you.
Cheers, mate. Okay. Well, there we go. We have finished delivering all of our stuff for today. If this has stirred up stuff in you, and if you want to talk to either of us, then in a minute I'll be talking about how to get in touch with us, what our contact details are. We also absolutely depend on you guys in order to know what we need to be talking about next. This podcast is about meeting and fulfilling and stepping into the place where our big yearnings are. The things that we really long for and the things that we really base our lives around achieving in one way or another. So we try to name these topics in ways that we can take steps in those directions. Our topic for next time is going to be, how do we balance these three ideas of being, doing, and relating? This is a thing that I talk about in my book, of these three strands to our lives, these three paths that we need to walk. One is simply being able to be. One is our function in the world, our outward expression, our impact, which is our doing, and all the interrelatedness that we go through in our lives, all the connections that we build, all the love that we share, and that's our path of relating. But how do we balance in ourselves these three paths? How do we balance being, doing, and relating? So that'll be our topic for next time.
I'm looking forward to that one already. I just think it's a really lovely, very simple, but at the same time potentially very deep paradigm or framework that you've come up with there, Alexander. It's not, other people have kind of spoken about that. But for me, they are all of them distinct enough and also overlapping enough. For me, and I think they can go really, really deep. Like I said, it already kind of makes me think about those aspects of myself. So yeah, I really look forward to that. I think it'll be good.
Great. Yeah, so we're going to be offering that as a paradigm, and then, as ever, just trying to explore ideas, inspire things within our listeners, and perhaps get you thinking in ways that are going to move you towards your big yearnings. If you want to contact us, then Neil, how can people get in touch with you?
The best way to contact me is through my website, www.coachingforlifefroome.co.uk, and my contact details are on there. I'd love to hear from you.
Marvellous. Okay, and if people want to get in touch with me, then you can either visit my website, which is deepcoaching.co.uk. You'll find my contact details on there, or you can book a call with me. And if you want to contact me through social media, then hop onto Instagram, find deep_coaching as an account. You'll see a little picture of my face. Give me a follow and drop me a message. I would love to hear from you. That's everything from us this week. We will be back in a fortnight's time, and we'll be talking about being, doing, and relating. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we look forward to welcoming you back in a fortnight's time.
Cheerio.